Everyone, and if you, I didn't talk to you during the cannon demo. I want to introduce myself. My name's Mike. I work with the Shenandoah Valley Battlefield Foundation, and I want to welcome you to, this is kind of our grand opening of a lot of our cross keys. So we've done a lot of changes, a lot of improved interpretation around the area, and in our partnership with Martha and Mill Creek Store. I want to mention you. I'm going to give a brief overview. I'm not going to go into detail. If you get me going, we'll be here at 7 o'clock tonight, and I'll still be talking about the beginning of the battle. But Cross Keys, Port Republic, I consider them really one battle. Some historians go back and forth on that, but we're going to concentrate on the first day, which is Cross Keys. So we are on the main Confederate body's right, was resting on this hill. This was Ewell's division, was basically from this spot over here, which there were two guns in this over, and I think right up here on this level plain is where I would put them, because these trees weren't here, and you could see a mile to a mile and a half towards Harrisonburg from right here. So just to orient you where you are, we're on the right side of the Confederate line on the morning of June 8th, 1862. So moving back a couple bits, so Jackson's army, this is really the end of Jackson's famous Valley campaign. He has kept 2 to 3 Federal armies busy for months, and this is the culmination. This, Port Republic is the last battle of the 1862 Valley campaign. So, sorry, I forgot to silence my phone. So the Battle of Port Republic, like I said, is a roll-off of this. But June 6th, Fremont comes pushing out of Harrisonburg. The Confederates fight a rearguard action, and during the Battle of Harrisonburg on June 6th, Turner Ashby, Jackson's famous cavalry commander and leader, is killed on Chestnut Ridge. There is a monument over there. It's up by the JMU, I guess lacrosse fields and things, but that's, the local United Daughters of the Confederacy and us have, we're working on some new interp and stuff there too, so that's a great spot to go see. But so Ashby is killed there, and that night he is taken down this road, Port Republic Road, which ran roughly where it does today. This was a period road. It meandered over on this side of the modern road quite a bit. And as it came down through the Widow Pence farm, which is over here, which was a key part of this battle, it actually was on this side, or the northern side, I guess, of Port Republic Road. But so Ashby's body is taken to Port Republic, taken to the Frank Kemper House, which is now the Port Republic Museum, another great spot to go visit, and his body basically lied in state there until it was taken home, and then he was eventually interred later in Winchester with his brother. So that's June 6th. The Army still maneuver coming through until the night of June 7th. The Confederates, Ewell's division. So that's why I'm going to go back to the one battle. Stonewall Jackson was in command of the Army. He had very little to do with the Battle of Cross Keys. He was in Port Republic. And frankly, this is one of the times where he sat there and he fell asleep and stuff. I personally think Jackson had battle fatigue and he was worn out, because he did a lot of actions that, at Port Republic specifically, that weren't Jackson-like. But General Richard S. Ewell, who later took over Jackson's Corps, divisional commander, his division is here, and he has about 5,500 men strewn out along this line, and his main force is right around the Port Republic Road. He has men over also along the edge, and Walker's brigade is over to your front, and they're protecting Goods Mill Road. And then there is the 15th Alabama, which anybody who has studied Gettysburg over time, Robert Oates and, fought the 20th Maine and everything. Well, he was here, and he left a very good account of his participation in the Battle of Cross Keys. He is over by the Union Church, which is Battlefield Road. So roads were very, very key to Civil War Army. I talked about how much you needed to move artillery. Well, it's a lot easier to move 10,000 men down a beaten down road than it is through fields, over fences and things. So artillery, cavalry, everything moved on roads. So much like Gettysburg, arguably the most famous battle of the Civil War, where they weren't going to Gettysburg to look for shoes. All the roads converged there, so it was a good place to bring your army together very quickly. And at the time, in June of 1862, the Shenandoah, if the rivers come together in Port Republic, the North and South Fork, well, that's in flood. And there's 2 bridges down there. That's the only way to get over to the Shenandoah River. So Fremont is pushing Jackson this way. Jackson knows it. He sends Ewell across the river and out here to deal with Fremont, while the other half of his army is facing the threat coming from his north under Union General Shields. So Jackson, once again, I say Battle of Cross Keys and Port Republic is won. He fought two armies in 2 different days, but Ewell was in command here. So Ewell has picked this position. Jackson has stayed in Port Republic. He actually almost gets captured in the morning of June 8th and stuff there. That's some other interesting stories. But Ewell is in command here. The infantry in this position was under the command of General Isaac Trimble. Trimble's an old officer, really aggressive, and very pushy. And if you've watched Mr. Maxwell, Ron Maxwell is going to be here in a little bit, the one who did Gettysburg and stuff. He found a really good actor to portray Trimble because he was pushy and throwing down the hat and all that. That was a good characterization of the man, from what I've read. He did not like this position. So to your left here, these woods weren't here. But up on where we have the new parking lot, and and the wayside, if you know where you walk up to Widow Penn's farm where the 8th New York was, that was woods then. It's clear now, and it's a hayfield, but it was not during the war. That was a woodlot. This was clear that wasn't, so it does make it a little more confusing. But Trimble didn't like this because he couldn't see past those woods. So he goes to Ewell 2 or 3 times and says, let me move forward. He wanted to move forward to that ridge. Ewell says, no, we're good here, we're good here. And this is really the only time now Jackson takes part in this battle. Trimble doesn't want to listen to Ewell. He rides to Port Republic and lobbies Jackson to say, let him move me forward. So finally, Ewell, Jackson didn't really overrule him, but there must have been some sort of a message, because after Trimble goes, he's allowed to move forward. So he moves his infantry, about 1,300 men, the 21st Georgia, the 15th Alabama, the 16th Mississippi, and a small part of the 21st North Carolina move forward to the far ridge over there where the most famous part of this battle will happen. Right? But on this spot remains the artillery. Okay? The Battle of Cross Keys was the first time that I've ever seen noted that the Federals, and specifically, and the newspapers as well, remarked at how well the Confederate artillery did. The Federals, and it's a lot of folklore, they swore that Jackson went out and paced off every inch of ground from this position all the way up to past the woodlot up there, because the Confederate artillery did so well. So there's no record of Jackson doing that. That was just, but the positions were really well, and there was a young man named Joseph Latimer, became famous at Gettysburg, the boy major. He was really came up in Confederate artillery. Now, he was killed at Gettysburg, but he had a section here of 2 guns on this side of Port Road, and they were destroying the Federals that ended up coming up to the position on Mill Creek Ridge on the other side of Port Road. So they had a crossfire gun, and I think sometime in the 90s, or late 80s, early 90s, they actually found some shells on this side of the road that could only have come from 2 Confederate guns that were on that side of Port Republic Road. So through that deduction, I know that they had them in a crossfire. And from here, if these trees weren't here, you could see over towards Union Church a lot clearer because the ridges aren't as high as looking straight this way. All right, so that's the basis. That's where we are on the battle. So if we're here during the battle, we would be able to see this way. We wouldn't see anything but the woods, but Trimble's line moves forward and is now ahead of the main Confederate line. The rest of Ewell's division stayed where it was. So on the left side of modern Port Road, they're along the high part, which we call Artillery Ridge or Mill Creek Ridge. And they're up there, and some of that ground is like this. So it was not difficult. And when the Federals tried, it was very difficult. They could not get up there. So the Confederate position on the left side of Port Road was never directly reached. And they took more casualties from the artillery over here than they did anything else. So Trimble has moved up. He's now 400 or 500 yards in front of the main Federal line. And one of his regiments, the 15th Alabama, is sent over to protect the Cross Keys. Because the Cross Keys name comes from, there was a tavern over there, or a boarding house, over around where the Ruritan Club is, in that area somewhere. We don't know exactly where the building was, but that was Cross Keys. That's where the name came from. So 15th Alabama is sent over there to protect that road, because Battlefield Road, it wasn't called Battlefield Road, but that was a way to come in and join up with Port Road to go to Port Republic. So the 15th Alabama is posted there in the cemetery that you see today. And the Alabamians start to engage as the Federals come forward. They're skirmishers. They were actually hiding behind tombstones. Some tombstones were hit with bullets. So they start to fight there. And then all of a sudden, and Oates, the colonel, he was a captain then, writes about how the colonel all of a sudden told them they needed to move. And he couldn't figure out why. They were defending the area, but when they looked to the right, they saw that now the Federals were moving in behind them. So the 15th Alabama took about a 7-mile trip this day. They start out there, they come back in double quick, so they run up, they come up a log road which is still there, and we have it marked over on our Artillery Ridge site. They came up that log road, they came in, and then they came all the way back around up to this position to see that Ewell had moved forward, that Trimble had moved forward, and then they came up around the right and ended up on the far right of Trimble. So the 15th Alabama starts on Trimble's far left and ends up almost on the farthest right that the Confederates have, all within 2 hours in the morning. So now, as the Federals are moving into position, they do that big loop. Well, the Federal commanders, you have Julius Stahl in command of the brigade that ends up coming up, and Blanker's division. And I've studied this battle for years, I cannot figure out why they came up the way they did and ended up in this horrible, massacre of one regiment. Other than, I think that they must have assumed that Trimble was still here. Because Trimble's moved forward that half a mile, they're in the woods, nobody knows they're there. There's two companies of the 21st North Carolina who are down in the ravine along Mill Creek there, crossing and with their left around Port Road and coming down this way to the ravine on the right, and they're in there, and they come back and they warn Trimble and say the Federals are coming. So the Federals have ordered a complete drive towards Trimble's position. The whole division is supposed to be going, but it's not coordinated. 2 regiments, the 45th New York, who comes up more in the middle, they stop about halfway through where they're supposed to drive to, and 1 regiment, the 8th New York Infantry, keeps going. Now, Civil War tactics say if I'm moving a battle line somewhere through you know, where I can't see, which they couldn't, there were trees and all that in different areas, you would put out what is called a skirmish line. So, you know, Napoleonic tactics have 2 lines of soldiers with rifles, and, you know, and like Revolutionary War, Napoleon things, that's how your men fought in battle line. But you sent guys out in front to clear obstructions, to go in and to feel out where your enemy is, because they'll run into them, the skirmishers. They're armed too, and they'll fire and all that. But they don't put out skirmishers, the Federals. So the 8th New York Infantry, expecting the support on the left of the 45th New York, comes walking right. They go down through the ravines and they come up, and if they come up through this beautiful hill of clover, which is still there, and when they come to the top of the hill, they suddenly realize, and they find out in the worst way humanly possible, that there's 1,300 Confederates sitting inside that tree line 40 yards away. So when they came up, the 8th New York Infantry, I think, had close to 600 men. They came up the hill, and the 21st Georgia is there. Their left is on the Port Road, and the center of the 8th New York came up to basically the center of the 21st Georgia. 21st Georgia had around 320 men. They were, 420 men, and they were armed with smoothbore muskets, 69 caliber muskets. So that fired a round ball, but they had buck and ball in there. So you had the round ball, and some small shotgun pellets were in there too. Bird shot and buckshot was in there as well. But there is also several accounts where, since they were around Ashby's cavalry, they went to the cavalrymen and they got more pellets. So they had dumped, a lot of these guys had dumped shotgun shells and pellets into their muskets too. So now you've got these 420 guys with the 600 New Yorkers coming right up to them. Well, now when they pull the trigger, not only one big round ball, but sometimes as many as 8 or 10 smaller pellets are coming out too. So speeding up, the 8th New York is coming up the hill. Trimble's men and the Georgians are down on their knees behind a low worm fence, and they're waiting. The first thing they saw was the finial on the top of the U.S. and New York flags come up the hill. Then they talk about seeing the muzzle of the rifles. So some people say they had bayonets fixed. I don't know if they did, but in theory, if they did, they would have seen the bayonet, then the rifle. They saw their hats, and Federal uniforms, when you had something on your cartridge box sling called a breastplate. So there was an eagle circle about 3 inches around, right in the middle of your chest. When they saw that is when and Cooper Nisbet, another great writer, talked about, he was there with the 21st Georgia, and he documented this. When we saw the breastplates, we stood up and we fired a volley. So the whole brigade fired. So not only the 400 Georgians, the 300 Mississippians to their right, and then the Alabamians who I mentioned had come up, and the 21st North Carolina, those 80 men came up too. So right under 1,000 guys stood up and fired at once. Well, the 8th New York lost 225 men just like that. They never knew they were there, and they walked into what we call the slaughter of the 8th New York. There's very few battles or stories in any battle where a regiment got beat up that bad, that quick, and then just was out of the fight. I mean, and it was instantaneous. So by the time the Federals or the Confederates reloaded and moved, the smoke cleared and the 8th New York was gone. When they came up, when they moved forward, they talk about the hundreds of New Yorkers lying in the clover, and they were lying there as thick as blackbirds, is what they said. So basically, 200 New Yorkers are laying there, and when the Georgians and Trimble came up and moved over. Now Trimble, being aggressive, he's not worried about the remnants of the 8th New York. he sees an opportunity. So, and he's not supposed to do this. He's on the defense. Well, he doesn't really bother with Ewell. He says forward, and his whole brigade starts moving forward. And they have a lot of success. So they drive on our right over here, and as you come up, and as it heads towards the Goods Mill Road area, there's a ravine. They call it Trimble's Ravine. He anchored his right there, and they pushed that way. Walker's brigade, which I had talked about before, comes in and joins the fight too. So now the whole Confederate right, Stewart's division, or LZ's division, and Maryland Stewart and stuff, all the Confederates on the left side of Port Road are staying there, and the Federals are attacking them. Well, at the same time, Trimble starts going towards Harrisonburg, and he wanted to go all the way to Harrisonburg. So he goes forward, he runs over the 45th New York, runs into the 13th Pennsylvania Bucktails, the ones who take credit for killing Ashby. He drives them in, and so basically we have Trimble coming in this way. So as he finally halts, well, basically because he was too stretched out, and he's going back to Ewell saying move forward, move forward. Ewell isn't going to move because their job is to keep Fremont from going and getting behind Jackson and Port Republic. His job is not to go and drive them towards Harrisonburg. So, you know, much like that, circling back to Gettysburg, you know, Harry Heath, and, you know, he's looking for shoes, and they do all this thing. It's hard to keep in control of a battle, and especially, you know, of all your forces. And if anyone plays war games or computer games, it's awful easy to sit there like it's on a chessboard. I don't know how they did it, because I mean, I would have forgotten about Walker over there. It probably would have been over here somewhere. So, but Trimble driving forward, he finally stops, and then the Federals pull back. They think they're flanked, so the Federals stop, and then, you know, and the battle basically peters out. On the left side of the road, I won't cover as much. It's not that exciting. The Federals tried to move up and attack the Confederates on the bluffs. They didn't, you know, they knew they weren't going to get very far, and mostly because the artillery over here was ripping them apart before they could even get there. And then that log road where the 15th Alabama came up, well, the Confederates had guns concentrated there, and they're obviously not going to let the Federals follow up. So the attacks from the Federal right on the Confederate left didn't really do anything. So on the evening of the 8th, Ewell's division then falls back towards Port Republic. And they're fighting the delaying action. Some of them, you know, they camped in the fields and stuff on this side of Port Republic and on this side of the river, waiting for the Federals to follow, and they didn't come. The famed Louisiana Tigers and all that, and the main part of they were on this side of the river until the morning of the Battle of Port Republic, and the Stonewall Brigade and all that were on the other side. So this is basically a delaying action to keep Fremont off. So that's the end of the Battle of Cross Keys, or, you know, my opinion, the beginning of the Battle of Cross Keys / Port Republic. But the 8th New York is really the fulcrum and the center point of that. And up on our hill, you know, up there, we have a parking lot. There's a walking trail that will bring you up, first-person accounts, and you can actually follow in the footsteps from the far left side as we're facing Harrisonburg. You'll follow in the footsteps of where exactly the 8th New York happened. And when you come up to the top of the hill and you read that one sign, which talks about thick as blackbirds and stuff, you realize, you know, there's a worm fence there. That's where the Confederates would have been. It was not a spot that you would want to be. So on the morning of the next morning, the battle on the 9th, Port Republic starts. Most of the Confederates here move across, and they wait on the other side with the bridges. Fremont comes up very slowly and doesn't occupy and help Shields, which he was supposed to be doing, until late in the afternoon when the Battle of Port Republic was over, and he deployed his artillery which started shooting, and actually they were doing more casualties on their own men. So the point being, the Federals never really coordinated well, and this was really kind of case in point where they didn't, because they outnumbered Jackson close to 3-1, and they were never able to put it together to bag him. So this is June 8th and 9th. By June 23rd, Jackson's Corps and everyone is in Richmond fighting the 7 days. So this is the end of the Shenandoah Valley campaign, and you know, and the real heavy fighting in the peninsula, and then leading up through the summer, Manassas and Sharpsburg happened from here. So, but each time something big happened in the east, in the basically the I-95 corridor these days, between, you know, the Confederate capitals in Richmond, the United States capitals in Washington. Whenever something happened there, something corresponded here in the valley along the 81 corridor. Because what Jackson did after the Valley campaign, he went south to Stanton, they went down to Orange, and they got on trains and were able to come in and join the Peninsula campaign. They were always very worried about that. And down the valley, which is north here, you know, the Shenandoah River is one of the few that flows from south to north. But down the valley, at that point, Winchester, that's why it changed so many times. You have all those roads which led to modern Route 42 and what, you know, the Valley Pike Route 11 was here. So anything, and if you live or visit the valley, anything within a few miles of either side of the old Valley Pike or Route 11, if it wasn't fought on, it was marched on or camped on. So, you know, that was the I-81 of the Civil War. All right, does anybody, Ron Maxwell will be here soon, or at 1 o'clock, so he'll, you know, be talking about some of the movies he's done. And he's done a phenomenal job of recreating, you know, getting authenticity into Hollywood is very difficult. I've been involved in a lot of film shoots and different things, so, but he did a very good job at it, you know, with Gods and Generals and Gettysburg and even Copperhead. So he'll be here to talk a little bit later. We're going to do another cannon demo at noon, and I'll answer any questions that I can about Cross Keys. So. Yes, sir.
By the way, that was terrific. How did the Federal artillery respond to the Confederate artillery on the Confederate left?
On the Confederate over there, I mean, they moved forward, but there was a Federal battery that got overrun. They were deployed very, very poorly as far as, you know, Fremont. But that was a consistent thing with Fremont. But here, there was some counter battery fire, because the shell they found over on that tree that I was talking about, there was a Federal battery over there. So that would have been, you know, it was an unexploded shell that should have exploded, but they didn't respond well. It was disjointed.
But there was counter battery fire landing in the Confederate artillery placed on artillery ridge.
Sure. Yep. Yeah. And toward, you know, but the guns on the Confederate artillery thing were intermixed with infantry. They were there. Infantry was next to them, and all. So they were intermixed. So whether they were firing but around 10 o'clock in the morning, there was a artillery duel. The Federal guns were firing with these, but once again, this was the first time the Confederate guns outmatched them. Usually the Federal guns were much better. So, which is, once again, leads to, you know, the folklore. Jackson walked it all up. Because for those of you who don't know, Stonewall Jackson taught artillery at VMI. And he studied it when he went to West Point. That was kind of his forte.
And Joe Latimer was his protege.
Yes,
VMI,
he was.
Right?
Yep. Latimer, young lieutenant at this point, in command of a section of the Courtney Artillery, which was recruited in Henrico County, right outside of Richmond. And they had 2 rifle pieces, ordnance rifles, though. They didn't have parents.
You know, interesting thing, young Joe Latimer came back from Gettysburg after his leg got blown off at Cemetery Ridge. They brought him here to Harrisonburg.
Yep.
He died a week before his 21st birthday.
Yep.
And he's buried in the graveyard here.
Yes, he is. Yep, absolutely. So, and he walked this ground, you know, I can't say he walked right where you were sitting, but I can't say he didn't walk right where we're sitting. So yeah, his guns were here, and this little knoll where this store is where I would put guns, because they would have had a clear range over there. Now some of the guns over there on the far left were able to shoot over there too, but the guns in the center, they wouldn't have been able to hit anything except for what was over here. So yeah, and they had a crossfire, but they had two guns here doing the crossfire. So that just goes to show you how even one single gun, but two can really, so the two guns over here held up close to 6,000 infantry because they didn't want to take those casualties. Yes, sir.
Did Trimble go all the way up to Port Republic and Cross Keys?
No, he did not go that far. He stopped about a quarter of a mile this side of there. You know, there's chicken houses and everything are up there on that hill. He stopped in that field. There was a battery there, and he went out a little bit into there, and then he stopped. Because my guess is when he looked to the left, he saw the weight of Shield, you know, or Fremont's army was all there, as they were back behind the ridge, not wanting to go into the you know, Latimer's artillery fire. So they were, the federal right was lagging back towards Union Church, and the further he went this way, much like when Oates and the Alabamians were there, they saw them coming in on their right. The further Trimble went, if Fremont, you know, did something un-Fremont-like and turned and went there, Trimble would have been completely cut off.
Help me understand how many guns the Confederates had.
Okay, the Confederates had 16 guns in different batteries along this position, but each battery typically had 4 guns. So there were 4 batteries under Trimble's command. 4 guns were way down on the far left, and this, you know, it kind of does resemble a fish hook, once again referring to Gettysburg. You follow around, and those guns were down the end, and they were able to fire at the Federals coming in this way. There were 8 guns in the middle. They could only hit things on this side of the road, and then you had 2 guns of Courtney's battery, which were 2 were right over on that side of Fort Road, and then Latimer's section is over here. My guess is a couple hundred yards away. So there were 16 Confederate guns. 10 would have been firing able to reach the guys on that side, and the others firing towards what was over here. And the Federal guns, they only had 2, so they had 12 deployed, but they had more in reserve that came forward. They were held back towards Harrisonburg. All right, any other questions? And you know, visit the store. Martha's got some great stuff in there, and we do have. You guys haven't seen them. We've got our unigrids, our brochures, which, you know, can guide you to the different spots around. Our new signs have QR things on there, so if you do that, you can listen to you know, to the stories of what happened during those specific spots. And we have them from Union Church all the way through to our Goods Mill Road property here, and the 8th New York Loop Trail. And this afternoon at 5, one of our associates is going to be giving a driving tour of the round, which will take you to all these spots too.
Could you just cover for like 30 seconds what you guys are doing to save the battlefield here, and also down?
That's a good point. Yeah, you know, the boss would probably appreciate it. So. You know, and some of us are old friends, because I mean, I've come here for years and years as a volunteer and as a living historian to raise money to try to purchase some of these spots before they're developed. You know, so with Harrisonburg at one point being, I think, one of the second fastest growing areas in the state, in the Commonwealth, this area has been very threatened. And Port Road has, you know, with the hospital and with the expansion of James Madison University, has threatened a lot of the battlefield. And a great spot is, we have some friends here who actually manage the Turner Ashby site along with us. That's case in point. That used to be like a nice park-like area. Now JMU has built fields within inches of the property, you know, so it's still wooded and you can still get a general idea. But it's kind of hard to imagine the Civil War when you're looking at fences and astroturf. So what the Battlefields Foundation has done with other partners like the American Battlefield Trust, which formerly was the Civil War Trust, and the Association for the Preservation of Civil War Sites, is we've gotten donors and grants and things, and we've actually purchased land, but we've also worked with landowners to put easements on land for historical or outdoor type of reasons or agricultural reasons, which will prevent it from being sold and developed. That's our main cause. This is the fun part of it, the intern and talking about the Civil War. And people call me and go, "Oh gosh, you got your dream job. You sit around behind a desk and talk Civil War all day." No, we're out talking to landowners. I'm out cutting down trees. I'm putting up signs. I mean, we manage about 7,000 acres up and down the Shenandoah Valley, all the way from Highland County and McDowell, north now into West Virginia. And we do that with 8 people, which makes for some long days, but our mission is to protect it and to keep it as intact as we can, and to tell the stories of what happened here. So whether it's this war, the Revolutionary War, whatever, I mean, this area between Harrisonburg, here, Port Republic, I mean, there is so much history. Winchester, I mean, George Washington held his first political office in Winchester.
Why should that history be saved? Why
should it be saved? So it's not forgotten. I mean, and I'm not going to get into political things with tearing down monuments and things, but it all has to be learned from, in my opinion. And I mean, I have, and I've dedicated my life to it, as have many people who work with us.
Good for you.
But it's important. I mean, I don't, people say we're going to have another, we're not going to have another North and South Civil War, but I mean, with the polarization of politics, you never know what's going to happen. But we need to remember, and as it's glazed over and glossed over in schools, I've got a 30-year-old son who was in the Marines. I got remarried. I have an 8 and a 5-year-old. And I see the differences in just what they're taught in between, in that 20-year period. It's important. I mean, history isn't end-all, be-all, but where we came from, how everyone strived to get where they are here, and from the American, the African-American standpoint, that's important too. We need to tell America's whole story. It's not all pretty, but but where we're standing is no better spot than to talk about that. And and that's why we've got cannons. Cannons are cool. They bring people out who aren't really interested in history, so it's kind of a diversion. Hey, come talk about a cannon, and I'm gonna get a nice guy like this to ask me a question. I'm gonna go off on a preservation rant. But I mean, it's all important. So no, those are great questions. Thank you.